So in the first recording, I mentioned that on the free response questions, you have on average roughly 25 minutes per question. What I suggest you do is that when you get the free response question booklet, you quickly read over all four, scan them, put them in order from easiest to hardest, tackle the easy ones first where maybe you don't need the full 25 minutes. Maybe you can do those in 15 and that saves you 10 extra minutes you can reallocate to one of the more complex questions that might take more than 25 minutes. So if that works for you, that's one strategy. Some people will just start at question 1, go on to 2, to 3, to 4 in order without doing that. The other thing I suggest you do is you scan the question once, so you very quickly, so you're starting to get an idea of what the question is going to entail. Is it going to be a two-dimensional array? Is it going to require recursion? Is it going to require inheritance? And then when you go back a second time, read it more carefully to see, okay, this is a 2D array. They want me to count the number of pixels that have a value of 255. So I know I'm going to need for loops, etc. So go back the second time, slow down, read it a little more carefully, and you should have in mind, okay, if this is a 2D array, I'm going to need to know how many rows, how many columns. You should be thinking about how you would do those kinds of things as you're reading it and formulating your response. And then go to the section where it says write your answer. I suggest you use pencil, not pen on the exam, and begin writing your response. Now in this one, the first question was about taking a picture, dividing it up into cells in a two-dimensional array format, with each cell representing a pixel, and each pixel having a numeric integer value ranging from 0 to 255, with black being 0 and white being 255 and grayscale being the numbers in between. So the easiest part, and this one is really not that difficult. So when you see it, they're telling you it's going to have a 2D array. I mean, they're telling you that up front. So you should be thinking, I'm going to use nested for loops. I'm going to have to figure out the dimensions of the array because they're not going to tell you what those are. You should be thinking about all of those things as you're beginning to read the question. And the very first part is they want you to basically write a for loop that goes row by row and counts how many cells have a value of 255. That's so easy. That's something that you've already done similar things many times. So here's a solution. I'm going to set up a counter. I'm going to walk the rows in the column, so I've got my nested for loops. Notice since I don't know the actual length, I don't know how many columns or rows there are, they're not going to tell me that. So this is where they're trying to see if you remember that you can use array name dot length to get the total number of rows. So if I have 3 rows, they go 0, 1, 2. So I'm going to loop as long as row is 0, 1, or 2. As soon as it becomes 3, I'm going to stop. And I can get the number of columns by doing array bracket 0 bracket dot length. Okay, and then I literally have an if statement. If the value at the given row and column equals white, notice I'm not using 255 here. They gave you those constants for a reason. They want you to use the name of the constant here. So if it equals white or 255, I'm going to bump up my counter by 1. And remember last time I said this returns an int, so make sure you return an integer as the last thing that you do in this method. Now this should really only take 5 to maybe 8 minutes to write this up. And then you can move on to the one that's a little trickier, which is this process image. Now what they're trying to catch you on in this process image with that whole compare the current value as you're walking the rows to a value that's 2 rows down and 2 columns over, they're trying to see if you can process through an array without knowing the actual dimensions, without having numeric values to hard code, and if you can keep from going out of bounds on the array. That's why they've got that whole +2 thing in there. So there are several ways you could do this. There are probably slightly shorter ways by a couple of lines of code to do this, but I'm trying to show you the most straightforward way that I can think of so you can logically come to the solution for this. To me, it makes sense to set up two variables, one to hold the total number of rows and one to hold the total number of columns. So I can get the rows by saying the array name dot length, and I can get the columns by using that bracket 0 bracket dot length. You just have to memorize how to get the columns. Array name bracket 0 bracket dot length. They do expect you to know that for the exam. And then I've got another variable here where when I do my subtraction, remember, if the value from the subtraction is less than 0, 0 being black, then I've got to set that cell to 0 or to black, okay? So I've got a variable. You could do it without one, but I think it's a little more straightforward for you to see how this is going to go logically if I have a variable that I can use to check and see what I need to do. So again, we're doing nested for loops in major row order. We're starting at the first row and going cell by cell across it, then moving to the second row and so on. So again, here they're testing your knowledge to see if you remember to use array name dot length. Here they are testing your knowledge to see if you remember to use array name bracket 0 bracket dot length to get your columns and your rows set up. Here is where the tricky part comes in. Now, I decided, to me it made sense, if row plus 2 gives me a number back that is less than the total number of rows, and column plus 2 gives me a number back that is less than the total number of columns, I know I'm still in the bounds of the array. This is my way of preventing an array index out of bounds error. Because if I have an array such as the one that they're showing here, and I'm on row 0 column 3, if I add 2 to the row as they tell me to do, I'm fine, I'm down here. But when I add 2 to the column number of 3, I get 5. There are 5 columns in it, but remember they are numbered 0 to 4. So I can't reference row 2 column 5 because that would put me out of bounds. So my solution was to have an if statement where I say take the current row that I'm on, add 2 to it, take the current column I'm on, add 2 to it, get those numbers back, compare them to make sure they're not equal to or greater than the dimensions of the array. Remember, I always have, since I'm having that 0 offset, I'm 1 less. If I have 5 rows, I'm going 0 to 4. That's why I'm using a less than, not a less than equals here. Same thing here. So I'm making sure that I do have a cell to check, that I'm not going out of the bounds of the array. Here I take the pixel value in the current cell that I'm on, because I'm going in that row major order, and I subtract the value in that cell that's 2 rows down, 2 columns over that they've asked me to check. So I do the subtraction, and if that changed value is less than black, remember they want you to use the constant names here, not the 0 value of black, but they want you to use the constant they've given you. If that changed value has a number that is less than 0, I've got to set that current cell to 0 or use my constant of black, which is what they want you to do. Otherwise, I know I've got to, I'm not indexed out of bounds. I know I've got legitimate values to do the subtraction. Now I'm just checking to see, am I changing the value to the difference between these two, or am I setting it equal to 0? And so that's what my if statement does here. Now I did this by hand in Notepad. This part did take me a little bit longer than the first part, part A, but I also wanted to check that I had my code correct, so I did come into NetBeans. Now I went ahead and set up the array and initialized it with their test values here. Also, I want you to see, because you are expected to know this for the exam, you can set up, you can declare and initialize a 2D array in this manner, with, here are my angle brackets. I have an outer set of angle brackets, and then for each row I enclose those values in their own set of angle brackets. So if we look at theirs, they've got 221, 184, 178, etc. I can initialize a 2D array by putting that first row here. Here is the second row. Notice each row has its own set of braces to indicate the beginning and ending values, and then I put a comma to separate it from the next row. Here's the second row, 84, 255, 255, 130, 84. Here's my third row, here's my fourth row. And that also brings out the point they want you to understand that a two-dimensional array is an array of arrays. In effect, I've got an array, a one-dimensional array, 221, 184, 178, etc. That one-dimensional array right there is the first row in my two-dimensional array. Okay? My second row in my two-dimensional array is a one-dimensional array consisting of the numbers 84, 255, 255, 130, 84. So you can think of a 2D array as an array of arrays. You can think of each row as its own one-dimensional array. So I know my computer NetBeans is having a memory issue, but I put all that code from Notepad that I showed you into NetBeans. I used their sample array values and I ran my program. I added a little print method so I could print out the values in the array before and after. Now they're not going to ask you on the exam to do any main coding. They're going to be asking you to write class code, just like on this question. For me to test it, I had to write some main code. So of course I had to use the constructor, which they did not show you, which is just the default constructor, but you were not responsible for writing any of that code. I made my own little print it method again in the question. You are not responsible for doing that, so do not spend time writing extra methods and then trying to say, oh, look how good I am. I wrote a print it method to print everything out so I could verify it. They don't want to see that. You don't have time to do it, and if you put extra code like that they did not ask for, they will actually take points off. So I'm showing you what I had to do to prove the code worked, but you would not be doing any of this on the actual exam for that question. You would only be doing the two methods that they asked for. So I printed out how many white pixels and I got my answer of 5, which was correct. Then I did the whole process image thing and I printed it out and I got the exact same results that they showed. So this is good code. It works. I verified that it works. And those would be my suggested solution to those two problems. So I'll let you think about that for a little bit and we will go on from there with the next question in the FRQs.